Welcome back to Let's Read Darksiders, the Abomination Vault, by Ari Marmel. I'm BurningDogFace, and it sure has been a while. I apologize for that. Been rather a lot going on. Without going into too much detail, I've dealt with burnout in multiple parts of my life since the last episode of this. So, yeah, my apologies. I'm trying to find a healthier balance. But this series did end up getting neglected while I was putting things back together. So, hey, let's get back into it. Today we're going to be looking at Chapter 20. Last time, Death had become concerned that his enemies might be able to get their hands on a small source of Ravaiim blood and use it to fully empower one or more of the grand abominations. Let's see here. Why the blood? The riders now stood on a thick lip of what might have been stone, or might have been desiccated, rigid flesh, protruding from the face of the cliff. It was part of a large network of ledges and tunnels they had just scouted, and which might as well have been carved specifically for their purposes. Defensible, low enough to see the plains below even through the murk, and with as broad a view as one could possibly hope for. They could not have asked for a better base camp from which to launch their wider efforts. It was also hideously unpleasant, as the rough contours, leathery surfaces, foul air, and occasional unexplained gusts all combined to suggest that they'd taken shelter in something's bronchial system, or perhaps its sinuses, but one couldn't have everything. Death tore his attention from the sheer wall, where he'd been contemplating the notion of a ramp that the horses could climb. What? It would seem to me that you and the other firstborn could have chosen any manner of safeguards for the abominations, including constructing them so they'd only work for you and nobody else. Why design the safeguards around Ravaiim blood? Not that simple. Death resumed his examination of the escarpment. Building in recognition of who was firstborn Nephilim and who was not would have proved difficult at best. And then, what if the time came when we wanted some of the following generations to wield these weapons against our enemies? You wouldn't be able to if the weapons only functioned for the firstborn. But if the weapons functioned for all Nephilim, we'd lose our mastery over them. No, it had to be a resource that we could control, but could be disseminated when we wished. Once we'd decided that much, Ravaiim blood was the obvious choice. We'd slain most of the race, we knew where their remains were, and had total control over their realms. And since the grand abominations themselves were constructed from Ravaiim remains, the use of their blood both was easier to incorporate and enhanced their innate power. I see. Makes sense, I suppose. Is there anything else I can enlighten you on, as long as we're standing around failing to accomplish anything? War either missed the irritated sarcasm in the question, or, more likely, had become so inured that ignoring it was now second nature. Actually, yes, since you're in such a forthcoming mood. Why hasn't the world on which you're building your new home slid into the abyss? I've heard it's just as dead as any other we left in our wake. It's anchored, Death said curtly, and refused to elaborate any further. War might well have continued his barrage of questions, much to Death's mounting exasperation, had the conversation not been interrupted by the sudden flutter of feathers. Dust appeared from the cloaking fog with a series of sharp squawks, and settled on the elder horseman's outstretched arm. Well, you certainly took your time. Enjoyed our little journey, did we? Squawk! So you've said. Then, more loudly, War, I believe our reinforcements have arrived. Precisely on cue, the light, already gray and diffuse, turned black as night. High above, but swiftly descending, something blotted the sun from the sky. Dirt and flakes of what might almost have been dried skin swirled around their ankles. dancing in the sudden downdraft, and the world was all but flooded with the sound of wings. Great wings, far larger than Dust's, numbering 100, if not more. For the first time in living memory, angels had come to the realm of the Ravaiim. Armor of rich silvers and golds, incandescent even in the near darkness. Some of the White City's warriors landed on the ledges and trails around the two horsemen. Others descended to the earth below, setting up a perimeter guard before their feet had so much as disturbed the dust. Redemption cannons and halberds, some placed in rotating racks that allowed a single angel to fire 6 or 8 in rapid succession, abruptly sprouted, almost fungus-like, from the corrupt soil. And from the center of the great winged phalanx, wearing a simple silver breastplate over his traditional robes of green, appeared Azrael. "Death," he greeted them as he settled upon the lip of stone. "War." "Azrael," Death returned. Then, after a puzzled look shared with his brother, "Don't take this amiss, but what am I doing here?" the angel concluded for him. The featureless mask dipped in a nod. "I sent Dust to the domain of the Council. I was expecting my brother and sister." "Apparently, the Charred Council has decided fury and strife are required elsewhere. Word of the Abomination Vault has begun to spread, Death. More than a few factions throughout creation are preparing to move." "We've met some of them," War said blandly. "Funny that," said Death, "considering that it wasn't long ago they were telling me that all 4 of us were assigned to this endeavor." "Hell's interests could be more widespread than we've seen," the younger horseman suggested. "It could. Or the Council has decided, now that there's a real risk of Hadrimon and Belisatra awakening the Abominations, that they want to keep strife and fury in reserve to protect them in case we fail." Death shrugged. "I suppose I can't blame them, really." "I'm sorry," Azrael injected, "but did you say Hadrimon?" "In a moment, one issue at a time." Death leaned over the edge, watching the angels settling in below. "So the Council sent you instead?" "The Council doesn't send us anywhere," Azrael bristled. "They sent Dust to us, along with a message requesting our assistance. Since we're already allies in this, and none of us wants these weapons awakened, I agreed." "Why you?" War asked. "You're a scholar, not a soldier." "I'd be offended if you thought otherwise," the angel replied. Then, more seriously, "I may not have devoted my life to warfare, but I've still seen more of it than most of my people. And my powers are not entirely without use on the battlefield." Death snickered. "I imagine not." "I felt it to be, less than politically expedient to ask Abaddon to lead this particular force." It was now War's turn to laugh softly. "I could not," the angel continued, "simply reassign one of the other generals without a long discussion, and I felt that sending a phalanx to serve under your command without a ranking leader might prove equally problematic. Again, given recent, shall we say, misunderstandings between the horsemen and the White City. So that left me." "You're certain the enemy is coming here?" "They need something in the earth here to awaken the Abominations," Death said, "or at least to awaken them for any great duration. I'll tell you the rest later, if necessary." "I see." Azrael didn't sound especially thrilled with the arrangement. "Tell me, can your steeds make the leap to the ground from this high up?" The riders both started briefly at the sudden non-sequitur. Yes," War said. "I wouldn't want to risk it from much higher, but yes. The trouble was getting them down to the ledge and the tunnels in the first place." Azrael nodded. The same wards that prevent us from entering this realm, save at specific points, prevent you from dismissing them and summoning them as you normally would. Precisely. I'll have some of my angels construct a harness and fly them down. It won't be the most dignified position, for anyone involved, but we'll get them there. Just make sure you tell them to cooperate. War scowled. Death just snorted once. I think, he said to War, that we ought to keep our feet out of reach of their hooves for a few hours after this. Thank you, Azrael. We appreciate the assistance. You're most welcome. Now, if you please, I dislike having to ask multiple times. You said Hadrimon? According to Lilith, Death told him. That's the true name of the angel we're facing. Apparently, he sought her assistance before joining forces with Belisatra. Hadrimon. I can't believe it. Now it was Azrael whose attention seemed focused solely on the activities below. You know him. It was clearly not a question. Azrael sighed deeply. Yes. Then, at the expectant pause, It's not a tale I enjoy telling, Death. It doesn't exactly paint the angels of the White City in our finest light. As opposed to my people, exterminating whole worlds and creating the obscenities that have gotten us into this whole debacle in the first place. Ah, yes, I suppose when you put it that way, shame is a relative thing. Then let's hear it, while we have the time. The angel permitted himself a second, lighter sigh, and spoke. This began, you must understand, quite some centuries ago. It was in the early days of the Charred Council's reign. That is, the Council had made themselves known to us as guardians of the balance, but they had not yet succeeded in, let's say, convincing heaven and hell to abide by their proffered pacts and treaties. As such, we were in the midst of one of the most brutal warring periods between the forces of the blessed and the damned. The bloodshed, the devastation. The worst of it was just as horrible as the devastated worlds that your own people left in their wake. And in our case, we weren't even trying to destroy the realms, just the enemies who had conquered them. A terrible, violent time. I emphasize this, you understand, because it is the only justification for what came next. Not sufficient justification, I think, but all I have to offer in our defense. You know of the Codex Bellum? The angels of heaven have lived by that register of laws, codes, and customs for eons now. Only those of us who were involved in its creation, or who were born under its aegis, can hope to fully grasp its intricacies. No outsider, however wise, has managed to do so. It is that layered, that complex, that precise, that restrictive. Too restrictive, I sometimes think. It includes, among so much else, the rigid conventions of interaction between angels of differing positions, different social castes, different military ranks, what behavior is appropriate and when, and what behavior is never appropriate. For the most part, we have little difficulty in following those strictures. We angels are, by and large, creatures of thought, not emotion. Still, we have our drives, our desires, our needs, the same as anyone else. And like anyone else, sometimes what we desire, and what we should desire, fall out of alignment. You already see, perhaps, where this is going? It was not the first time the two angels of widely disparate ranks fell in love. It will certainly not be the last. But it is in all the history of the White City, the most infamous. Hadramon was, at the time, well, I think there are no equivalents in any military structure with which you're familiar. The ranks of the angelic militias are varied, and the differences remarkably subtle. Let's say that he was a field officer of some authority, in command of multiple flights of underlings, and that should suffice. Her name, you knew there would be a her, of course, was Raziel. She was the field leader for one of the squadrons that fell under Hadramon's command. Had she been nearer his equal in rank and position, they might have found some legal means of legitimizing the love they felt for each other. Had they been more widely separate, then at least the conflict of interest would not have been as great, and perhaps our leaders at the time would have felt less of a need to... what use speculating? What was. Their love could never be, and they both knew it. Again, they were hardly the first among angels to find themselves in such straits. The library of the Argent Spire has multiple shelves devoted solely to the mythic poetry inspired by such hopeless romances, whether unrequited or shared. For other races, other cultures, the triumph of such a tale might involve the illicit lovers finding some means of thwarting convention, of allowing their passions to flower. But we are angels. We are warriors. Mind, law, discipline, these are our heroic ideals. For us, a soldier worthy of respect tends to his or her duties, obeys the strictures of the Codex. Emotion, satisfaction of one's desires, these must come second. Throughout our history, they always had. Not this time. Most angels know this story. It's one of our most popular cautionary tales. The general belief in the White City is that Raziel was weak, somehow lesser than those who faced such temptations before. Me? I'm not so certain. Sometimes I wonder if she might not have been among the strongest of us to knowingly risk so very much. Either way, it scarcely matters. Raziel acknowledged her feelings to Hadramon, and in the fate of her admission, he could no longer deny his own. They arranged a later meeting, in which they might discuss their possible futures, any options that might allow them to be together. That their love might also, at that time, be consummated went unspoken, but I doubt that the thought had failed to occur to either of them. Once the immediate encounter had passed, however, Hadramon began to reconsider. Either, depending on whom you ask, he rediscovered the courage of his convictions, or his courage failed. However one looks at it, Hadramon pondered all the possibilities, everything that could go wrong, all that he would have to give up, whether he was prepared to violate the Codex Bellum for love. I'm uncertain precisely how he phrased his report, but when Raziel arrived at their prearranged meeting place, she found a squad of soldiers waiting to detain her, to hold her until she could stand before a military tribunal for such gross violation of legal properties. Of Hadramon she found no trace. To my knowledge, the two of them never faced each other again. Had it ended here, with Raziel suffering demotions in rank, reassignment to unpleasant duties, social stigma, then this tale would be a sad one still, but ultimately of little importance. Unfortunately, what happened was not nearly so rational. I remind you again that we were at the height of our war against Hell. Further, the Charred Council had only recently emerged as a power in the struggles across the Tree of Life, and the White City did not yet know whether or not they would prove to be an enemy. As such, military discipline, always of paramount importance among my people, was at its most fevered pitch. This was absolutely the worst possible time for any sort of breakdown in the chain of command or the social order, and the generals of heaven determined to take advantage of the opportunity presented them. They would make an example of Raziel, a chilling precedent that would be remembered through the millennia. Standard disciplinary action would not suffice. Long-term imprisonment or physical mutilation would resonate, but it would also make her a burden on resources that could be better used elsewhere. Death? That might do, save that dying for a cause in which one believes is the highest possible honor to many of my people. It might make her a rallying cry for others who harbored secret desires to challenge the stringent laws of the Codex Bellum. And besides, death was a threat with which every angel lived. The notion of losing oneself, of returning to the Well of Souls, was unpleasant, but hardly terrifying. I understand that they even approached the Charred Council to request that Raziel be banished to oblivion. But the White City's envoy was rebuffed. Raziel had committed no crime against the balance or the council itself, and they were unwilling, rightfully so, I should think, to serve as a tool of vengeance for others. All of which, alas, left one option remaining. First, Raziel was stripped of some of her memories. Not many, only those that involved the defenses and military tactics of the White City, so that her knowledge could not be used against us. So, too, was she robbed of the magics and powers that would otherwise have allowed her to locate or manipulate the passageways between worlds. Then, with great ritual, in a ceremony observed by thousands, Raziel was exiled to Hell. I know. Her crime hardly seems worthy of such a fate, does it? Yet that, I am forced to confess, was her sentence. A great portal was opened, and Raziel was allowed to fall until the very notions of distance and depth became meaningless. And there, in Hell, she would suffer whatever torments and tortures the demons chose to inflict, to say nothing of whatever vile transmutations the pit itself might wreak upon her, until the day the infernal creatures finally tired of the game and killed her, a day, her judges knew, that would not come for a very, very long time. Hadrimon abandoned his duties not long afterward, and disappeared. I would like to think that if he had any notion of what would be done to her, he would never have reported Raziel's lapse in propriety. His later behavior certainly suggests a guilty conscience. Several times since then he has briefly reappeared, engaged in some half-planned scheme directed against the leadership of heaven, hell, or both. At times he has attempted to reignite the war between above and below, staging an attack of one upon the other with the aid of mercenary soldiers, committing sabotage and leaving evidence to implicate the enemy, that sort of thing. At other times he's made abortive efforts at raising a force of soldiers powerful enough to invade Hell itself. He's never said as much, or If he has, I never heard about it. But I can't imagine he thinks of it as anything else than a rescue mission. The sad truth is he's something of a joke in the White City. His efforts are desperate, feeble, easily detected and thwarted. They're almost the workings of a child, as though his regret and sorrow have overwritten whatever strategic acumen he once possessed. As such, and because some of us still felt sorry for him, no concerted effort at locating and capturing him has ever been undertaken. We all assumed that he would eventually wear himself out and disappear, or would attempt something so foolish that he would be caught in the act, by heaven if he were lucky, otherwise by hell. Not an angel alive would ever have believed that he might become a real danger, especially after all this time. And I imagine he never would have had he not come across one of your profane devices. I don't know where he found it, or how. And again, I don't imagine that it matters. All I know now is that, for the first time, Hadramon may have the power necessary to wreak whatever vengeance he still feels is his due. And now that he has the influence of the grand abominations stoking the hatreds in his soul beyond all comprehension or sanity, I shudder to think of just how appalling that vengeance may be. And that will do it for Chapter 20. That was a very heavy one. I hope it was worth the wait. I have a bit of a sore throat today, and I'm out of practice, so I found it very difficult to maintain consistently different voices for Azrael and War. So I decided that even though the Azrael in Darksiders 1 has a much grittier voice, that I would go for something more soft-spoken to differentiate it from the Horseman. Well, I hope you've enjoyed listening, and I hope to see you on the next episode of Let's Read Darksiders, The Abomination Vault by Ari Marmel. I'm BurningDogFace, and I'll see you then. Later!